Nice. Thanks, Brandon.
Yep.
So before we dive into today's session, I just want to do any announcements. So Brandon, I know you had an announcement you wanted to share with the group. And then if there's any other folks that have announcements they want to share about what's going on in their own communities or events or webinars, upcoming events that you want to share, would love to take a few minutes to share those with the group so that others can join. Brandon, you had one announcement.
Yeah, I just want to touch base on the event again. We have, we're lining up some great speakers. We've got John Younger, John Healy, Jeff Schwartz, Simon Hill, Mike Morris. A lot of great knowledge sharing is going to happen there. We'll be releasing more information about the content and the specific agenda as we dial it in. I'll drop the information into the chat as far as getting a ticket, reserving your spot. We'd love to see some of you and your clients there if you can make it. That's all I have on that.
Thank you. And you can follow Open Assembly's LinkedIn page for new announcements of upcoming speakers as well. Does anyone from the community have events they want to share with the group? Any announcements?
Maybe.
Glenn?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say that this is a long way off, but the first week of November, we've got our Future of Work Freelance Innovation Summit as well. And I'll be able to share some more details of that closer to the time. Also, just been saying that we've got our benchmarking study, which is the whole of the European Union, UK, digitalization and the future of work. So when that's ready, of course, we'll send it out through Brandon and the rest of the groups. You can see it. Maybe sort of do a short presentation of some of the key findings and hypotheses that we bring out of that after the summer. So yeah, we'll be happy to be able to do that. And also on the legislation side, we've got this week the European government's decided on their text to move forward on the platform worker rights directive as well. So we'll be following that one, and when that takes shape and we've got some final legislation in place, to update you on how things are looking as an example or a terrible warning for other geographies of the markets.
Thanks, Glenn. That's great. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Any announcements or events you want to share? You can also drop them in the chat too, and we can circulate them amongst the group after this call. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Glenn. All right, so let's dive in. So I'm really happy that we've brought back Tammy Browning, President of KellyOCG, for our discussion today. Tammy manages KellyOCG's $12 billion global MSP portfolio. She's also been an outspoken advocate when it comes to creative solutions, when it comes to everything from talent scarcity to workforce resilience and more. She's here today to share her insights from Kelly's latest research and specific areas that she's passionate about and areas of the report that are ripe for industry opportunity. So glad to have you back, Tammy. I'll turn it over to you.
Ashley, thank you for having me back. I always enjoy joining the community and giving a little bit of insights, and really, frankly, being on the phone with a handful of you that I know are in my same space and fight the same battles we fight all day long in terms of the talent journey and finding the right talent for our customers and keeping them satisfied through these very uncertain times still 3 years later that have not come back to what we thought would be normal, no new normal. So thanks for having me, Ashley and John and others that are part of Open Assembly. So thank you for that. I am going to give a little bit of a backdrop. I'm going to, I think, do you want me to share my screen, Ashley, or do you want, I think Nick's going to share, correct? Is that what you said? There we go.
I think Alex is pulling it up.
Alex, there you go. So I'm going to give a little bit of a backdrop of our rework report that we do. This is an annual report. If you jump to the next slide, this is an annual report that KellyOCG has done for the last number of years. And I'm going to start with a little bit of backdrop on this because I think it's really powerful. It's a global report, but it initially started in our Asia Pacific region where we we're seeing some unique dynamics, as you can imagine, country by country, where we were trying to kind of understand what the talent was saying relative to what they wanted and their workforce strategies, and then career developing opportunities, and then what the customers or the prospects of organizations they wanted to go work for, what they were saying. And so we sent out this workforce report in 2017, and because it had such wide and well-received feedback from the community of APAC, all countries, we decided to scale it in 2018 to include all of North America as well as EMEA. We did not have at the time Latin America involved. It has now today scaled to include all 4 major regions. And then the other thing that it includes, and I should mention, is our previous reports that we've launched each year have only really centered on what the customer said, or your customers or our customers had to say, top organizations. And this year it includes talent and what they had to say. It actually asks the customer or prospect or organization the same exact question. So keep in mind, this was about 1,500 C-level executives, not just Kelly customers, by the way. This was C-level executives across many, many different organizations. Over 4,200 talent so also responded to this. It was in 11 different countries. And really, we identified in the report 2 different groups. The groups are those that are what we would call a workforce resilient leader, and those that are called workforce resilient laggards. So you'll see a little bit in the data around those that are ahead of the curve or doing better in the pillars by which we represent, which I'll talk about. And then you'll also see those that are falling behind in what it is that is causing them to fall behind, and potentially what they could do to course correct. And then really this report and how we position it, and feel free post this call today to use it as you see fit, use some of the data as you see fit, but we've used it as a roadmap to enable organizations that really want to build a very workforce resilient strategy that's nimble, it's quick, it's fast, and it allows them to scale up and scale down. And so that's what we've used the report for, to really position us as subject matter experts in what executives have to say and what talent has to say too. So if you'll shift to the next slide, I'll go ahead and jump in. And what you're going to see in some of the data is that talent today is very likely to leave their employer in the next 12 months. Not shocking. We've seen that. When you consider the fact that we've been talking about the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and other things for the last couple of years, this really isn't shocking. But what we did want to break down is how that represented from a talent perspective. So you can see it's bucketed in various labor categories, whether it be job titles or in fact men to women. And there is a pretty big disconnect between executives and talents and what their perception of workforce expectations are that are driving these staggering numbers. 28% of talent are likely to leave their job in the next 12 months. And the number one reason for that actually that jumps off the page is poor work-life balance and this lack of development opportunities. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. People don't feel as though they're loved. They feel overlooked, they feel overworked, they feel undervalued. That is very clear throughout the entire report, that when you combine what people are having to say in terms of 28% of them are likely to leave over the next 12 months, that is really scary when 72% of them are senior leaders around the world. So there's going to be this clash between leadership leaving, talent leaving, and it's going to cause severe disruption in many organizations that we've saw this last year, which I'll hit on here in the next slide. But 38% of executives, which is really fascinating, their reason why they think people are leaving their organization is health benefits and potentially not having enough time off. So it's kind of a disappointing situation when you look at it, and people say it actually has nothing to do with money or pay or benefits. It actually has everything to do with the fact that you don't treat me very well. So if you jump to the next slide, I'll give a little bit more of a backdrop here. So 25% of executives say their organization has the ability to support well-being, and morale has declined. So they're not saying it hasn't. They recognize it. Leaders are recognizing there's a problem. But when you compare these results across the country, what we found was in the US, which is interesting, where workforce resiliency was actually more focused on. The way that we found that to be more prevalent throughout the report is the US actually did have more of a focus towards improving labor categories. So for talent, they looked across permanent and temporary or contingent, or what we might call third party or gig work. They did look at improving training. They did look at improving development for them. They also looked at improving DE&I and company culture. But what's really disappointing is in last year's report, that was up 62%. This year, it's actually up only 17%. So there is this notion in the US that we're going backwards from where we were, maybe right into the pandemic and through the pandemic. And then maybe this last year, there was a lot of time spent on it. But now what we're finding is perhaps we're going back to the old ways of working, or the path of least resistance, and forgetting about those things that created workforce satisfaction and more resilient workforce. So I just encourage all of you, if that's something that your organization is kind of stopped working on, or you feel like maybe isn't top of mind anymore, we see that throughout the data here in the US, but we're still way ahead of the game in the US. Now, I happen to be sitting here in the UK as we speak. And so let me give you a little bit of a backdrop on what the UK leaders are saying. They're actually doing a better job at providing skill development for their workers. So what we saw throughout the report was that the UK is investing more in training and scalability and re-education or reskilling of workers. They were way ahead of any peer region. And then talent in Australia and Singapore, I think we maybe all want to take a little bit of a page out of talent in the Australia and Singapore, is they have the lowest least likely to leave in the next 12 months. And the reason for that is they focus on not only just the resiliency that we talked a little bit about, but they also focus a lot on career development, career pathing, allowing people to be more flexible in their work arrangements. They also have decent pay and benefits. So there's an added benefit that they're doing and they're also focusing a lot on talent retention as a practice, more than any other parts of the world that we surveyed. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway. If you've got an opportunity to take that back to your organization and really look into what they're doing in Australia and in Singapore, it would be a nice thing for your organization to learn from those resilient workforce leaders. Now, if we jump to the next slide, there's a long-term implication to some of the things that I just shared with you. When you consider this notion that we talked about before of quiet quitting, and you may remember even from my last podcast, I think, John, I had with you, I made a comment that I think that quiet quitting has been happening since the beginning of time. I think that everybody has been quiet quitting for a very long time. It just wasn't as prevalent and well known as it is today. And the reason is because we just didn't have the data or the insights to understand what that really meant. But I will tell you, I never would have thought that nearly 50% of the workforce was actually only doing the bare minimum of their job. That is really scary. And so it's really clear that employers are losing ground on the progress that has been made during the pandemic. It's very clear that notion of feeling unvalued and unloved and underrepresented in an organization has become more a detractor for employees. 53% of executives say that their profitability in the last 12 months as an organization has declined, and they directly tie it to the satisfaction of employees. So you consider that they're realizing they're actually losing the ability to go to market and win in a competitive way because they've lost ground here. And by the way, that was a decline from 62% from the year before. So meaning 53% of executives said, hey, we're losing ground. The prior year, they were suggesting we're really making big headway. And in fact, 62% of them said we're doing far better than we had before. And only 48 executives say that their ability to retain top talent has limited their turnover. So they're saying, hey, even with trying to put retention strategies in place and doing other things, we're still losing the talent. And that also is a decline of about 61% from the prior year. And the reasons, again, are that I believe we have put people in the ability to be a bit more flexible in their workforce, a bit more flexible in their jobs, but we have given people a lot more work, and they're now sitting potentially in their home offices for 12, 13, or 14 hours a day, and they just are burnt out. So I think there's something to be said here on how we can learn from these organizations and what to do next. So I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. So I want to quickly talk, if you'll jump to the next slide, I want to quickly talk about technology in the workplace, because very resilient organizations are in fact putting more AI. I think it might actually be a sin, or we could have a real bad conversation if ChatGPT or some other AI technology doesn't get brought up in every conversation and podcast these days. It's top of mind for everybody. But we do have an entire section in our report on how talent feels and how organizations feel about the use of AI and technology in the workforce, and are they afraid of it? In fact, I think a couple of years ago, I did some talks on this, notion of robots taking over people's jobs was a thing of the past. Well, fast forward in this last 6 months, and maybe we are seeing the significant progress that we thought we would see in the prior 15 years has come to life really, really fast. So what we found is, on the contrary to popular belief, the talent actually still wants more technology. They want AI. They want an ability to be more flexible in their jobs by using technology so they can focus on core work as opposed to a lot of the mundane tasks. They want the ability to learn this technology, and what better way to learn it than at their desk or working. They also want to have the ability to change the way that work is done around the organization so that they can be more effective across. And then the upskilling and reskilling is an opportunity that every person we interviewed said, I really feel that if I can take the tasks off my desk that are stopping me from learning, I would happily engage in using more technology. So many organizations are already using automation. In fact, 61% of executives say that they are, in fact, infusing technology at the worker desk. However, only 33% are actually adopting it. So there is an adoption issue to the technology. The laggard group, I will say here that 32% of the laggard organizations actually said that they're not using technology. So this was one of the reasons why they felt they were lagging behind and their talent was less satisfied in the workplace, was because they weren't providing them the tools and resources that they needed to be successful in their career. But I will tell you, there is still a significant amount. I think, I'm going to go on out on a limb. You've probably all heard this, but there's still a significant amount of skepticism around what this is going to mean here in this next year. And in fact, I actually look forward to the report next year as this launches to determine how this is a technology and other useful tools have really kind of revolutionized the way talent is working. The good news is that 71% of executives and talent, almost peer-to-peer, say that they do believe that technology is going to better their work experience, and the organizations feel it's going to better the talent's experience. So, and that is true all around the world. So that is true for UK, Australia, Germany. In all cases, it was almost about 75% of all executives and talent said they're looking forward to how technology is going to help them in their careers. So, I'm going to jump really quickly to the next slide, which is really the pillars of a workforce resilient organization. So if you want to really think about practices you could put in place, or things that perhaps some of the clients you're working with, you'd like to share opportunities to say, here's some data around workforce resiliency and how we could be better partners together. The first one is really that ability to scale and align the workforce to the business challenges. So solve problems, figure out a way to engage and create a more workforce agility by solving challenging issues. And then, of course, diversity, equity, inclusion is top of mind. I will tell you, just from an anecdote perspective, we in Kelly are seeing more and more requests for DE&I in this year, in terms of very specifically around worker type. What is the worker slates coming through the door? Can you give me here in the US much more tier 1 spend than we've ever had before? This has become much more top of mind again than I have seen it in many, many years. During the pandemic, it was very different DE&I requests. These DE&I requests are much more at that actual level of being able to track and educate and report out what they're doing in DE&I. And it's not just a check the box exercise anymore. This is a real problem that we're being asked to solve every single day. And the ability to do that, it takes a lot of internal collaboration in your organization to change the way we look at DE&I. And then corporations still have a long ways to go in terms of what it is that stops them from being rock solid in this space. And a lot of times it's over legislated is what causes some of the issues in this space. So the more and more we can consult with facts and data around why this is important, feel free to use the data we put here around DE&I, because it will help you educate your organization, particularly HR, TA, and maybe even your legal orgs around why some of those old misnomers around co-employment and other things should probably be dusted off. The other thing that is interesting here is our report suggests that several strategies that you can adopt over time. You don't have to do all three of these things at the same time. So when you think of them in sort of an ability to be nimble, I always suggest you pick up one or two of the areas to be more resilient in your workforce in a calendar year. I think oftentimes we try to boil the ocean. So really focus on having the right strategies and consider the right mix of talent in your organization. And this is what made those resilient leaders stand out from everyone else, is they really focus on these three pillars. And you'll see that throughout the report, which you will have access to. By the way, it's many, many pages long. I think it's almost 100 pages. That said, let's go to the next and kind of start to wrap it up a little bit. What can you do besides building a more resilient workforce is to really integrate agility into your strategies. What we've seen for so many years is organizations put a strategy in place and they really run the course for a number of years. But the world has changed. It's literally changing almost every single day. But in this last year, it has changed more rapidly than ever. In the previous 3 years, obviously, we had other circumstances that caused it, but the political headwinds we're facing, the economic headwinds we're facing, the technology disruption. Be very agile in your strategy. Anyone that remains static today, and talent strategies in particular, and isn't evolving or thinking differently about how they engage workforce, especially in this environment or in this forum of talent where gig talent wants to work in the ways by which they want to work. If companies aren't really thinking about that in a way that we've really got to, again, dust off old policies, change the way people come through the front door, allow them to work more freely, come and go as they please, that is going to be a barrier for most organizations if they don't consider that. Also, there needs to be a recommitment to DE&I. And I say really focus on that is not just a check the box. Again, some of the statistics I gave you earlier, it's very clear that that fell off as the number one priority in this last year. It was for 2 years, the number one priority. It's clearly fallen off a cliff. And then we'd have to listen to our employees. I kind of feel like we're in this state where employers today feel like there's this flood of talent in the marketplace. And so therefore they can be more picky and they can go back to the way things were, start demanding people to come back into the workplace again. In fact, I just was with 3 clients this week and all 3 of them have a 4-day-a-week demand that they have to be in office, and they're losing talent all over the place because there are many companies that are saying, actually, we'll stay the course and allow flexibility. I do think we're a world that has amnesia, and we are starting to have amnesia. It's happening and we can feel it everywhere. I'm here to say that the talent is still speaking very loudly. There is a significant disconnect between what the talent wants and what corporations think the talent wants. And so understanding that and being able to be poised and prepared to how you address what talent wants and be the advocate for what it is they're still saying, because this report was actually going to suggest that enterprise organizations and executives have stopped listening. And so we've got to be the advocates to remind them to listen, and then really consider that digital technology, as much training as you can give to your teams. And I had the opportunity to meet with a couple of you just at the very onset of this call, and both of you in the industry of employing staffing or some type of deployment of talent. I've never had so many people in my organization jump at taking training as they have taking ChatGPT training. When we put every recruiter through it and how to use it and how to help, literally, we could not stop people from taking the training. It was overwhelming how much people want to learn how to use technology in their workplace. I think we need to embrace it. We need to figure out, what works and what doesn't, and really engage listening to how it's going to change the way your talent works and how much more effective they'll be. And so with that, if you'll go to the next slide, our report, you can find a couple of things, a couple different ways. We'll make sure that you all get a copy of it, and feel free, as I said, to share some of the data. Feel free to even cut some of the data out. I have had many companies cut and paste some of our findings, send it to your customers and say, hey, I don't know if you saw this. I'm not so ego-ridden that you have to keep the report in my KellyOCG format. If you want to use some of the data in here, feel free to use it as you see fit to help drive thought-provoking conversations, because this is really about bringing the community of people that advocate for talent together to put the message in the hands of the people that need to have it. So feel free to use it as you see fit. And other ways that you can find it, I post it on my LinkedIn. So if you want to go to my LinkedIn page at any given moment, you can, but we'll also make sure that you get a copy of it either in chat or as a follow-up to this session today. I'm happy to answer any questions. I wasn't following the chat, so I don't know if there are any, but if there's some questions, I'll happily take them.
Great, Tammy. Thank you so much for walking us through. I am curious, though, the recruiters that have gone through that ChatGPT training, any additional, any feedback that you've gotten from them so far? Any stories? Oh, shoot, I lost her.
Is it from that question? I thought you were asking the
no, for you. Yeah, you said you would.
Okay. Yeah. So the recruiters that are taking it, first off, I think they're all suggesting how scary it is. I don't know if you all feel the same way, but they're suggesting how incredibly powerful it is, that it almost changes a person's resume or profile to such an extent that it actually oversells the talent. So somehow the talent is going to have to figure out how they really speak to their skills at a different level, because the resumes that are coming out of ChatGPT, or really any of the AI tools, there's a few of them out there that we use, they're almost evangelizing the talent so much more effectively than the talent could evangelize themselves. And so if the words that are on that page doesn't match in an interview, I could see that becoming a big problem in the future. So that's one area, if it's somewhat scary, that they're worried about that. And then the other thing is, it's just, frankly, it's just creepy, because you don't actually have to put a ton of information in there for it to be able to pick up sentiment and sort of change the way you think. But the other piece that we did find is it doesn't always follow facts properly. So when you do give the training to your recruiters, you have to remind them every single day to reread what ChatGPT. I'm super fearful this is going to be super easy cut and paste, and recruiters are going to start sending resumes out that just don't have the right facts on them. And it will happen at some point, there's no question. And then of course, here in Europe, I think that we're going to have much bigger issues with keeping any AI or technology in place for resume building and sourcing and things like that. It's going to become highly legislated very, very fast here for sure.
Yeah, I've heard about issues with fact checking with lawyers using ChatGPT too, right? And that has kind of bit them in the butt. That's really funny. Thanks for that. And Bob, you had a question about the technology section of the report. Do you want to ask Bob Pulver? Are you on? I think he's still on mute. Bob had a question just to clarify. So the automation that you're talking about in the report, is it a catch-all term? Does it include cognitive automation, generative AI, everything?
Everything. So it goes everything from an RPA, so really looking at how work is done throughout. It also is technology that is enabling people to be a bit faster in their career. It's also just hard tech. So, everyday tools and resources that you would use to include your computer and Wi-Fi and other things. So it's enabling technologies that it highlights for somebody to be able to do their job more effectively. The other thing that it talks a little bit about is robotics and automation. So there is some findings in there around the upskilling and reskilling of workers related specifically to robotic automation taking over lower skilled roles. So it's got a lot of interesting facts in there.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, Ben in the chat, a lawyer got busted using ChatGPT to write a defense argument and quoted cases that didn't exist. Yeah, I heard it from you. That's now I'm recalling where it came from. Yeah, it seems like the jury's still out literally on all of this. Does anyone else have questions they want to ask Tammy, or insights, or just general gut reactions from what she shared?
I have a question. How do you feel open talent platforms play a role in this in the coming months? Like what's that going to look like from your vantage point?
It's a really deep conversation, but I'm going to give you kind of three things because I'm super passionate about it, by the way, in terms of gig platforms in general. So I see a convergence of talent pooling. And the convergence will be gig platforms that also are talent communities for direct sourcing, that also are talent communities for RPO, that will become a self-service over the next 3 years for many corporations. So how I see that playing out is I see very quickly companies, and I'm getting asked every single day by some of the world's most biggest logos you would imagine that we represent, particularly in the MSP space, that are asking for a talent community, and they want not just gig labor. They also
Angel.
Hold on a sec. Sorry, Tammy. Let me put them on.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. You got them. So they want the communities to be seated, pre-qualified, vetted, and they want to be able to source and screen themselves in a self-service way. I think we all know, if you've been in this industry a really long time, I think that it's going to be a little while before the hiring managers get comfortable with self-sourcing. But at the end of the day, I do think that's where it's going to head. And I also believe that we'll see the talent communities become much more sophisticated around stack ranking talent in a more effective way that allows someone to click and start and go and do their, whatever short-term work and then go on to the next. And I think the industry needs to catch up to, again, policies and legislations in order to allow that to happen more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned comfort. What makes them uncomfortable at the moment?
So a couple of things that I experienced. This is a personal. I'll give you a couple of personal experiences. Customers' names not included, but I will tell you, just night before last, I was at dinner with a client and we were talking specifically about gig work, and this is a big logo, a massive logo. And we were talking about having talent communities available at a self-service, and they agreed it would probably be a little while, but they still wanted to be able to have it so that an organization like me can source and screen for them. And I said, the first thing you're going to have to do if you really want a bespoke talent pool that is nimble and is part of a community and is a gig worker in some way, or you are going to have to change your indemnification policies in your MSAs. If you do not, and you make every single person come through sign a massive MSA that says they're indemnifying you from any ways by which they walk through that front door, you're not going to get the right people in that community. You really have got to change your contracts. And you cannot assume that the contract you use for temporary labor is the same contract that you would use for gig workers in any way, shape, or form. I don't know how long it's going to be that I'll advocate for that, but I am very vocal and loud in the space that gig needs to change the contracts.
Hey,
Does that
Tammy,
help? Yeah.
A question I have, we've been getting a lot of questions from whether it's prospective clients, partners. When you talk about DEI, I think the first part is how do you capture that data around reporting? And I did some consulting at a DEI expert company, and it's tough. It's self-reported, it's fragmented. So like, how do you propose the platforms and the ecosystem start addressing what is a sticky subject? Like, do you have any advice, best practices? Because we want to be DEI, but it's really hard in recruitment efforts to be DEI if you don't know who is part of certain protected classes. Like it's just a very challenging problem. Would love to get your perspective.
It is very challenging. And not only is it very challenging, but you hit on the head, the self-selection is, we're never going to have clean data. It will just literally never happen. Because if the talent has the opt-in option to pull in and pull out, you're only going to get a sample size of who agreed. So we are not going to solve for that problem. So we're only going to be directionally correct when we're providing DE&I numbers. And sometimes we have to be comfortable with that. The other thing that we're doing and advocating, and I will tell you, we play a lot in, as you know, in the MSP and in the RPO space. So the VMSs don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole either. They don't want that data in their tools. It's for them, it's PII. They don't want it in there. We have made inroads with a couple of them by allowing the worker to opt in on the work order and then encrypting on the back end. So our data is pretty clean in those particular clients that allow us to do that. So I encourage you, my advice is really push on your company and being able to have the talent have some sort of opt-in technology. Because most of the time, what we're doing is we're collecting it and then inputting it in the tool. We need to create an entry where the candidate themselves is the one putting the information in the tool. And some of the VMSs have actually allowed us to do that now. If you go into our RPO space where we're in our company databases, their ATSs are really bad, very clunky. They have no way to track it. And in almost all cases where we do that in RPO, we are manually doing that on their behalf at the time of hire. So the struggle that we are all going to have in this industry is almost all D&I data is post-offer. So you're not really tracking what's happening during the interview cycle. Some organizations are, but very few. And that's where I would say challenge your HR organization, because I have challenged my own to say we need to start collecting the data during the interview cycle so that we can start looking at, do we have challenges in bias in the hiring practices and all the other things that that many companies are too uncomfortable to unpack. So it's a tough one, Ben, to be honest with you.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. I have a question. You surveyed the talent this year.
Yeah.
Are they all full-time employees? Like, are there, is there a breakdown of that? Are they freelancers, consultants, suppliers?
There is a breakdown, and it was all labor categories. So 4,300 people in general, and they could be any kind of labor category. So either contingent or full-time in some way, shape, or form. In fact, some of them even are contingent through maybe on statements of work or working for outsourced BPO type organizations too.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Any other questions? Link, Karen and Bob, you had stuff going on in the chat.
I'm gonna come back to my open talent topic again. Do you see do you see some of these large logo companies having a chief open talent officer in the future, something like that? Could you see that as like a role in the future? Someone who primarily focuses on hiring, getting the talent through open talent platforms? Yes,
we're already actually seeing it. There is a couple of organizations that have, I don't know what their titles are. They're sitting in talent acquisition, and they are intentional about identifying talent communities, owning the talent community, having a SLA or some sort of KPI on their own personal career that the talent community is used within their organization. So they're almost evangelizing the platforms. And I think they're actually getting paid, like bonus and kickers and all sorts of things that they're driving companies to their own organization to use these. So we're already seeing that. I don't know what they're going to call that role over time. The other thing that we're seeing that's a massive shift from the previous 15 years. So for those of you that have been in this industry, I'm going to date myself. For those of you that have been around a long time, it used to be that HR owned all talent. And then it went very quickly to kind of like this TA role or recruiting kind of lead. And then for the last 15 years, it's really more been dominated by procurement. And now the shift is very fast. We are seeing more companies actually take procurement out of the practice and putting TA back in it. That's where you'll see the talent communities become much more prevalent. And you'll see much more of that total talent management strategy. That's why I'm saying those I see the convergence of that talent community actually being always by which a company wants to hire talent, and the decision trees and all the things that will go into that in terms of breaking down, you know, maybe the work. So I just yesterday, a meeting I had, it was about they're going to actually remove JDQs completely and only have skill-based jobs. So there's no titling. They're going to actually remove all titles and JDQs and go to skills. It's going to be really interesting over the next year for sure.
Interesting.
Thank you. Any other questions or gut reactions for Tammy?
Yeah, Tammy, to that last point of switching from job descriptions to skills-based, does that mean, like, do you see then a massive increase in spend on any sort of skills assessments platforms? Because if suddenly you go, we're not filtering based on a bunch of halo effect things and buzzwords, we are, like, how do you assess those skills at scale, right? Is it simulations? Is it tests? Where do you see, because there's just not enough interviewers to do 15-minute screens.
There's not. I don't know. Maybe we should all run out and go build a software. I actually don't know I don't think any of us know that answer. I do think yes, because if you go to skill-based, you're going to go back to kind of this buzzword search engine again versus sentiment reading. And that doesn't work. So there's going to have to be some understanding of what that means and what skill-based really, I think we would all agree we should get rid of the JDQ and go to skill-based. I just don't know how in practical application that's going to work from a sourcing perspective. And we have some of the best and brightest probably on this phone, and I'm probably sure that many of us can't answer that question yet. It's going to be really challenging.
Yes, it is.
Thanks, Ben. Anyone else as we're wrapping up here?
Yeah, just to comment on Tammy's last comment. That's what I'm seeing. So the talk that I'm doing in Puerto Rico is exactly on that, the skills-based organization. And one of the things that we see companies struggling with is the transition. And what they're trying to do is to create almost like a database of skills that they can then assess people on. But in terms of the mechanisms for that assessment and what they're basing that on, they're still taking a very sort of job-based approach. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it in the future, but perhaps the skills base is some of the answers to a lot of the things that Tammy highlighted in her study.
Yeah, you know, the thing, Rochelle, that's so fascinating around that, and I don't know if any of you, there's some legislation around actually using skill-based training in a hiring decision. So you're not allowed to in many countries actually allowed to opt out an individual in the hiring process if they didn't pass your skill-based test. So there is going to be an interesting how the legislation manages skill-based over the next year for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rochelle. Awesome. Well, thanks for our discussion today, Tammy. So many wonderful insights, and we'd be curious too about how the data and how the stories change year over year for the report, especially as Kelly has continued to expand the report and bring in more folks to offer their insights. So thank you for being here today. Everyone, thanks for your questions and for taking time out of your schedules to engage with us. Our next call will be on July 6th. We've got Mark Hanot coming in with some other contributors to tell the India story. That will be a fascinating conversation. So look out for that, as well as new announcements for the event in October.
Thanks, Tammy. That was really great. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Good
Thank
to see
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to see you all again.
Thanks.
See you next
All the
time.
best.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.